Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would review this little video and talk about this topic that I found very particularly interesting. And of course, this is going to be the topic about the possibility of there being a George Kambosos Jr. versus Devin Haney matchup. And this is going to be me talking about overall the potential of these two fighters. And if you've seen some of my videos before, or if you've seen some of my analyzations or my breakdowns about both of these fighters, you know, in my opinion, what I pretty much think about both George Kambosos Jr. and Devin Haney. And I do think that both of them are decent fighters. But when I take a look at them, do I necessarily see fighters that, in my opinion, are the creme de la creme? Not necessarily. It's not, that I don't appreciate what they can do. It's not that, I don't think that they're not good fighters. I do think that they are good fighters. But I think that eventually, once they finally face someone that not only is motivated enough to face them, but someone that also can compete with their size and skill set, I think that more than likely they are probably going to get beat. And a certain amount of people may disagree. Listen, what I'll say about Mr. George Kambosos is this. He was able, of course, to pull off the upset over Teofimo Lopez. Do I think that it was against the Teofimo Lopez that overall did not expect George Kambosos to be that motivated and be that good? Yes. Do I think that, I'm not going to say that it was accidental, but do I think that he fought against the Teofimo Lopez that fought a very, very crappy fight? Yeah, personally I do, but, it is what it is. You give George Kambosos that respect. The big question is, who is he going to face next? Is he going to face maybe Ryan Garcia? Is he going to face Vasily Lomachenko, Gervonta Tank Davis, Devin Haney? I think any one of those fights would be acceptable. Because when you talk about Lomachenko, Ryan Garcia, Gervonta Tank Davis, or Devin Haney, all of them, some of them at least have somewhat of a appeal. Some of them, of course, were either former champions, or when it comes down to they are current champions, or, they have a decent amount of star power. So I think that any one of those fights, in my opinion, is acceptable. Now, apparently, according to recent news, there is a possibility that maybe a George Kambosos versus Devin Haney fight could happen. And in this video, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, he is going to explain where he thinks George Kambosos could go a little bit later on, and also where that of Devin Haney could go later on. And in my opinion, if this unification fight were to happen, I do think that it is a great fight. I do not mind that fight happening whatsoever. I was somewhat in hopes that the Lomachenko versus Kambosos fight would happen just to see if Lomachenko could prove himself once again, to see if he could come back. But Lomachenko may not get that opportunity. So it is what it is, but we'll see all in all what happens. But anyways, I can certainly not be mad with any one of those fights that George takes next, because I think all of them have somewhat of appeal. But anyways, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, he's going to be talking about the possibility of there being a George Kambosos versus Devin Haney fight. Let's get into it.
It's all in their backyard, so it doesn't bother me. I'll fight anybody.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So I wanted to give you guys an update on the George Kambosos versus Devin Haney negotiations. Within the last week or so, there were reports or rumors that George Kambosos, he was going to pull out of the Devin Haney negotiations or the fight, and instead, he was going to fight the very inactive Ryan Garcia. There was rumors that there was going to be a 2-fight deal where both of them would get a tune-up fight. George Kambosos, he came out, he shut all those rumors down, and he said that he will not be fighting against Ryan Garcia, and his next opponent will be either Devin Haney or Vasily Lomachenko. Now, I've been telling you guys since day one, it would be very difficult for George Kambosos to justify fighting against Vasily Lomachenko, a man who lost in the playoffs, a man who actually lost to the guy that George just beat, Teofimo Lopez, fighting him instead of fighting Devin Haney for undisputed and for more money.
In my opinion, actually, it wouldn't be that hard to justify at all. And like I said, that's not me saying that I don't want Devin Haney to get his shot. I think all in all that Devin Haney, of course, has somewhat done enough to deserve his shot. But there's a lot of boxing fans out there that do want to see Vasily Lomachenko get his seconds upcoming, or they want to see overall him get his possible second chance. Either way, whoever is going to get the George Kambosos first, whether it be Gervonta Tank Davis, it seems like that more than likely is not going to happen, because more than likely he's going to be facing that of a Rolly Romero. So that's probably not going to happen. But the two options that seem likely next are either going to be Vasily Lomachenko or that overall of a Devin Haney. And I think that either of those fights are very terrific fights. Do I think that George Kambosos looks at Vasily Lomachenko as the fighter with more appeal? and overall that he looks like that as the better fight for himself? Yes, I do, because Vasily Lomachenko, on a lot of pound for pound lists out there, even including mine, he still has a lot of pound for pound appeal. Now, of course, a certain amount of people, they may say, oh, well, why do you put him on your top 10 pound for pound list? You know, he lost his last big fight against Teofimo Lopez. That certainly is true. He did not show out the best in that fight. No doubt about it. But Lomachenko is still an extraordinary fighter. He's a person, all in all, that, in my opinion, is a very, very greatly talented fighter. He's a person that clearly has an A-grade skill set. And I think, all in all, that, George Kambosos takes a look at him and he says, you know what? I think that the risk overall and the reward, that they would somewhat be on an even playing field. If someone were to face a Devin Haney at 135, and this is not me saying that they shouldn't fight Devin Haney, but this is just me saying overall what I think the fighters think at 135. A lot of people I don't think are willing to face Devin Haney, or they don't want to face him, because when they take a look over at the risk and reward factor, they may get a decent payday. But Devin Haney, on a lot of pound for pound lists out there, and in terms of appeal, he doesn't necessarily have the same appeal or amount of star power, or when it comes down to it, all in all, he does not necessarily have the same amount of pound for pound acclaim as some of the other fighters, or star power that maybe a George Kambosos could fight. That's why, if I had to guess, George Kambosos seems like he's going to be facing Vasily Lomachenko next, but we'll see what happens. I could be surprised.
Lomachenko is a top-ranked fighter. That means Bob Arum is his promoter. There is no way Bob will go out of his way. Bob is not even going to attempt to match DAZN when it comes to paying both of these fighters. Remember, Bob Arum is the same promoter that
But they may not have to. Because George Kambosos may not ask for that much money against Vasily Lomachenko. We'll see what happens.
Tried to sue Al Heyman and accused Al Heyman of paying fighters too much. Now, you would think even if Bob felt that way deep down inside, that would be something he would keep to himself. But he said this in interviews. So far, and there's no guarantees, once again, anything could happen, things are changing every day. But according to Devin Haney and what he posted on his Instagram, they just had a meeting. Devin Haney, Eddie Hearn, they just had a meeting today with Kambosos' team. And according to Devin Haney, the meeting was successful. It's also a good sign that Team Kambosos, they only had this meeting with Team Haney. They didn't have this meeting in person with Golden Boy or Top Rank. If this fight comes to fruition, it will be one of the biggest fights of the year because they're undefeated, but more importantly, because they're fighting for undisputed. And they are evenly matched regardless of who you think is going to win. Speaking of hypothetical...
They're somewhat evenly matched. I would agree with that. George Kambosos, in my opinion, and I've said this in the past several times, in my opinion, if he is going to face one of the elite fighters there, one of the more talented guys, whether it be Lomachenko, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Gervonta Tank Davis, I'm not sure if I would favor him in any of those fights. Maybe if he were lucky enough to catch Ryan Garcia, maybe he could beat Ryan Garcia. Maybe he could beat Lomachenko just because Lomachenko, he's smaller in stature, and Lomachenko has shown that, he doesn't like to take the power as much at 135 as what he did in other weight divisions. And he doesn't have the same punch resistance. He could beat Devin Haney just because Devin Haney has a very similar style, and I would say that Devin Haney has a little bit of a leaky defense sometimes. He showed that in the Jojo Diaz fight. He was able to get hurt a couple of times, and on top of that, in my opinion, even though he was able to clearly dominate the fight, I didn't think it was his most impressive performance, but Jojo Diaz was just too scared to really get in there and get countered by Devin Haney to really make the fight, super close. So it just is what it is. But at the end of the day, we'll see what happens. George Kambosos, in my opinion, I think all in all that what he really is, I think that he's pretty much the next Buster Douglas or Andy Ruiz Jr. Basically meaning what? I think that he's a fighter that he ended up getting that very, very big win over Teofimo Lopez, but as soon overall as he really faces another legitimate contender, one overall that more than likely takes him seriously, and one that sees overall his strengths and his weaknesses, I think that more than likely he's going to lose to them. He's almost kind of like the boxing version of Holly Holm, where Holly Holm, when it came down to it, she was able to get that larger-than-life win over Ronda Rousey, in the very, very big upset. But once she beat, Ronda Rousey, she was never able to win the belt ever again. So it is what it is. We'll see what happens. I hope that I'm wrong about George Kambosos, but we'll see what happens. Do I personally see him beating a Devin Haney? No, I could see the fight being somewhat competitive. I think that George Kambosos, for example, is better than any of the opponents that Devin Haney has fought in the past. And if Devin Haney were to get this win, in my opinion, whoever gets this win, in my opinion, if this fight were to happen, they're going to be put on my top 10 pound for pound list. because not only are they undisputed, but I do count both Devin Haney and George Kambosos at least as A-grade fighters. George Kambosos, in my opinion, he's an A- fighter, but he's still an A-grade fighter in my terms. So we'll see overall what happens. Both of them are decently talented, but I do see certain faults within their style. But I just think that Devin Haney, I think that he would throw too much for George Kambosos. I think that he would be a little bit bigger than him. They're both actually somewhat decently slick, but I think that Devin Haney throws more. I think all in all that is going to be the main thing that is going to get over George Kambosos. Kambosos is not a guy that likes to throw a lot in a lot of his fights. That's not me saying that he can't win the fight, but what I am saying is that Devin Haney, I would see him out-edging him probably either 8 rounds to 4 or 7 rounds to 5. But we'll see what happens.
Let's just look at a couple different scenarios if this fight, once again, were to be announced. When it comes to George Kambosos, he's in a good situation regardless if he wins or if he loses. For one, George Kambosos, he's going to get a ridiculous payday. If he loses this fight, the perception will be, well, he lost to arguably future pound-for-pound top 3, one of the best fighters in the world, Devin Haney. He will get the...
Yeah, but the majority of people don't really take a look at Devin Haney in that light. I certainly don't. Dante's Boxing Nation said, well, he just lost to one of the future top 3 pound-for-pound fighters in Devin Haney. I don't think a lot of people really take a look at Devin Haney like that, because when I take a look at him, I don't see someone that's a future top 3 pound-for-pound fighter. Even if you just want to talk about, just in terms of black fighters, black American fighters, I don't think that he's within, debatably, even my top 5 of most talented out there. I mean, if you want to talk about some of the most talented black fighters, even if you don't want to mention Terrence Bud Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. that are just on the come-up, if you want to mention black fighters, black American fighters that are just on the come-up, I would have overall Shakur Stevenson above him, indefinitely. I would have Gervonta Tank Davis above him, indefinitely. I would have Montana Love above him. When it comes down to it, I would have Jerome Boots Ennis above him when it comes down to it. And there may even be a couple of other fighters that I'm not personally mentioning at the current moment in time. Devin Haney, just in terms of a talent level, now he may be on the top 10 pound-for-pound list maybe because of what he maybe could accomplish at 135 if he somehow can get his hands on some of those bigger fighters. But I think when people really start to see Devin Haney move up the weight classes, if there's decent competition there, I think people are going to start to finally realize that Devin Haney, even though he's decently talented, that with some of the deficiencies that he does have and with some of the holes in his game that he has, the more that he is going to find himself in competitive fights against fighters that are really naturally his own same size and stature, I think it's going to be very hard for Devin Haney to win some of those fights. For example, if he goes up to 140 pounds, and if he faces a Montana Love or a Jose Ramirez or a Josh Taylor, or overall, even a possibly even a Victor Postol, if he faces them on the right night, he could get beat by any of those fighters, in my opinion. Now, I could be wrong. Later on, Devin Haney may become a lot better than what I once originally thought. I've not been correct on every single fighter out there, but that's just what I personally see about Devin Haney. It's almost kind of like with Jamal Charlo. A lot of people, they say, oh, Jamal Charlo, he has the best chance against Canelo Alvarez. I've never seen it. And I think once people really get to see Jamal Charlo against real 50-50 fights, against fighters his own same stature, where he doesn't really have that same advantage anymore, and against fighters that are going to really have the gall to really fight back with him, you're going to start to see some of the deficiencies and hole in Jamal Charlo's game. And you've already seen that, because when he went up the weight divisions, he did not really look overtly impressive. Even when he was at 154, and some of his fights, he did not look overtly impressive. Like against Austin Trout and then later on Matt Korobov. That's what I see out of Devin Haney. When I seen him against Roy Linares, I said, wow, you know what, this kid, he can really, really become something. But when I seen him in that Jojo Diaz fight, he got hit way too much for comfort, in my opinion. I seen him get hurt a couple of times in that fight. He did not keep his hands up a whole lot. I was not overtly impressed with him. We'll see what happens. Not every fighter matures the same. Terrence Bud Crawford at one point in time, I was not 100% overtly as impressed with him either, but now look at him today. But not every fighter matures like that. When I take a look at Devin Haney, do I see someone that is a future Terrence Bud Crawford? No. But we'll see what happens.
Isaac Cruz treatment. After Isaac Cruz lost to Gervonta Tank Davis, now he's actually a bigger name than he was before. Same thing with...
I understand your point, Dante, but I actually don't think that that's going to go down here. The reason why I say that is because I don't think Devin Haney, he's not a star like Gervonta Tank Davis. You can only get that type of attention if you're facing someone all in all that was a star. And, you basically lost to someone and gave someone a competitive fight that is a star. So if you're a person that, fought Canelo Alvarez, and let's say all in all that Jamal Charlo fought Canelo Alvarez next and the fight was super duper competitive, it could have went either way. Your brand can somewhat be built off of that and says, well, you know what, he wasn't expected to win the fight at all, and yet he had a very tough competitive fight. So that's how your brand can be built there. But if George Kambosos, if he goes into this fight and if he loses, and clearly loses, in my opinion, his brand is not really going to go up because Vasily Lomachenko, Ryan Garcia, and Gervonta Tank Davis, all those fighters, in my opinion, they have bigger brands and bigger star appeal than what a Devin Haney does. If he beats Ryan Garcia's face is all over YouTube, it's all over Instagram, it's all over the place. So, in my opinion, that actually would be better in terms of his brand, in terms for his face, in terms of the boxing. If he beats Vasily Lomachenko, there's a decent amount of people out there that still believe that he is one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world, so that would be great for his appeal and his brand. If you were to beat Gervonta Tank Davis, you're talking about the biggest star probably, anywhere under 140 pounds. So it is what it is. So all those fights, in my opinion, even though none of those fighters have legitimate belts at the current moment in time, in my opinion, they actually would do better for his appeal than what a Devin Haney fight would. If he loses to Devin Haney, it's like someone losing to right now Demetrius Bubu Andrade. Yeah, a lot of people, say that Demetrius Bubu Andrade is a very good fighter, but he doesn't have that much appeal. He doesn't have that much pound-for-pound acclaim. So that's why I believe more than likely George Kambosos will go after Vasily Lomachenko, but we'll see all in all what happens.
Canelo Alvarez losing to Floyd Mayweather. Canelo losing to Floyd Mayweather is what made Canelo Alvarez a star in the sport of boxing. Kambosos, he proved in his...
I understand what Dante is saying, but a part of the reason why he's saying that is because he hates Canelo Alvarez so much. Well, Canelo was already somewhat a star before Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought him. But that Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight, of course, is what made him, or at least, maybe could have took him to the next level because he was on pay-per-views a lot after that. But Canelo has built his own brand as well. He's gotten wins over Cotto, Golovkin, yada, 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 all those guys. So, Danny Jacobs, Laura, so whatever. So Canelo has built his own brand. But if George Kambosos loses to Devin Haney, I just don't think all in all that's going to be the same way because you would have to allege that Devin Haney is one of the biggest stars in all the sport, and he has somewhat of a fan base, but I wouldn't say that he's one of the biggest stars in all the sport. When Canelo lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr., Floyd Mayweather Jr. was the biggest star in the sport. When Isaac Pitbull Cruz had a very competitive fight but lost the fight to Gervonta Tank Davis, you can debate is one of the 5 biggest stars in all the sport. Devin Haney, I don't even know if he's one of the top 20 or 30 stars within the sport, maybe top 30.
His last fight against Teofimo Lopez, that even if he can't beat Devin Haney, there's still a lot of other really good fighters that he can beat, which means more big paydays and more...
Yeah, but if he loses to Devin Haney, I don't think a lot of fighters are really going to want to fight him. The only reason why they're interested in George Kambosos at the current moment in time is because, they basically say, like, they're licking their chops right now, and they're basically saying, I could basically get some free belts. That's basically what they're saying. So there's a bunch of different predators looking overall, like I said, at that injured Impala right now, or that injured gazelle. that's overall, what they're looking at. They're basically looking at this guy and saying, what, if I face this dude, I would whoop this dude's ass. It just is what it is. At least that's my opinion on the situation. If George Kambosos loses to Devin Haney, I would be surprised if he got another title shot very, very soon. That's just my personal opinion of the matter, but we'll see what happens.
Else for him to win.
And more than likely, in my opinion, if he ends up losing to Devin Haney, you're probably not going to hear that much from George Kambosos from now on.
I'm saying if Kambosos were to lose to Devin Haney. Now, if Devin Haney were to lose this fight, the situation wouldn't be the same because he's obviously on a coincidental list and the high expectations are already set for Devin Haney.
If Devin Haney, all in all, were to lose this fight, it may end up even being worse. It pretty much would be the same. Both of these fighters, they have to win this fight because neither of them, in my opinion, have that biggest star appeal. George Kambosos, of course, at the current moment in time, he's probably more well-known because he was able to beat the man that beat the man, of course, in Teofimo Lopez. So, when it comes down to it, he's highly acclaimed right now. And on top of that, he has 3 out of the 4 main belts. But both of these gentlemen need to win this fight because it would be catastrophic to their career if they ended up losing this fight. Because George Kambosos, if you're a person that is a rising star in the ranks, that's not a person that you want to lose to. And Devin Haney is not a person that you want to lose to either. Even though a lot of people, of course, they would disagree with me. But You know, if you're a Jojo Diaz, you know, even there you could tell Jojo Diaz he was not 100% on facing Devin Haney. He wanted to go after Ryan Garcia. The reason why is because he knew that Ryan Garcia had more star appeal. But Ryan Garcia, that fight just did not come to fruition. So we'll see what happens.
Like I told you, a lot of people expect, a lot of boxing fans, they see the talent in Devin Haney. They expect him to be pound for pound one of the best fighters in the world in the near future. I mean, of course, Devin Haney will be able to bounce back just like Kambosos, make some more paydays.
Whoever loses this fight, I don't see them overall bouncing back very, very well in their career. If Devin Haney ends up losing this fight, he's never going to be the same in his career. If George Kambosos loses this fight, he's never going to be the same in his career. And more than likely, we're going to see probably another version of Adrian Broner. And I know a lot of people, they're going to disagree with me, but it just is what it is. There's a lot of momentum within this fight, and whoever loses this fight, when it comes down to it, it is going to be a major hit, a major hit to their career. I understand the points that Dante is trying to bring up, but I don't think he realizes that Devin Haney is just not a very big, he's not a very big appeal type of boxer. There's just not a lot of people overall that are very huge fans of Devin Haney. Once again, that's not me saying that I would not like to see Devin Haney get a shot. This is just me explaining that I think that if George Kambosos and Devin Haney, whoever the loser is of this fight, is going to be catastrophic for them. But we'll see what happens.
But it would be far more...
Whereas, if you lost to a Vasily Lomachenko, it's not going to be as bad because Vasily Lomachenko, like I said, he has a lot of pound-for-pound acclaim right now. A lot of people are taking a look at Devin Haney, and a lot of people, they're still kind of figuring out who this guy is.
Devastating. If Haney were to lose this fight, as opposed to Kambosos losing this fight, just like it was devastating for Teofimo to lose.
And whoever were to lose this fight, when it comes down to it, I think that it would be worse for them because, obviously, of course, but Dante is trying to put that out there, basically saying like, oh well, it's not that big of a deal if either one of these guys lose this fight. I don't think that's correct. I think that George Kambosos, he can afford to maybe lose to a Ryan Garcia or a Gervonta Tank Davis or a Vasily Lomachenko because all those guys somewhat have some sort of star appeal. But if you face someone all in all that doesn't have any star appeal and you end up losing to them, like when Mikey Garcia ended up losing to Sandor Martin in his last fight, that's a big hit to your career, and not only just to your career, but to your brand. If you lose to someone overall that is pretty much virtually an unknown, it's almost like a very, very big hit to your brand, in my opinion, because people basically say, wow, you just pretty much lost to a bum. What can you really do now? Now, sometimes it maybe can help out someone's brand because then, they'll be in a big fight afterwards because, they're willing to prove themselves, and then they'll say, okay, well, can they, return from this fight? But if George Kambosos ends up losing this fight, which I predict that he more than likely will against Devin Haney, but you never know. I would say it's about 60-40 in favor of Devin, maybe 70-30, but I'd give George that good 40%. He's good power, decent feet, good hand speed. Only thing I don't like about George Kambosos is the same thing I don't like about Devin Haney. He don't like to keep his hands up. And in my opinion, he gets hit a little bit too often.
Lose to Kambosos. So we'll see how the negotiations play out. Once again, anything can change. Things are changing on a day-to-day basis, but it's looking real good. It's looking like there's a very good possibility that we're going to get to see Kambosos versus Devin Haney in May of this year. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
Dev, he said that you...
But anyways, that's really about it for this video. I just thought that I would talk about that because I thought that it was very particularly interesting. But whoever overall is going to be the winner of this fight, it's overall, like I said, whoever the loser is of this fight, it's going to be catastrophic, in my opinion, to their career. Because whoever loses this fight, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to bounce back. And certain people may say, oh, what are you talking about? Some of the greats, they always bounce back. But that's the thing. I don't look at either of these guys as all-time great fighters. I just don't. When I take a look at George Kambosos, I think that he's a person that got lucky that Teofimo Lopez did not take him seriously and fought a very lousy fight. And I think when I take a look at Devin Haney, I think that he's a better fighter, by a smidge over George Kambosos. But I think once he starts to move up in the weight divisions, if he does that soon, especially if he can't get any big fights at 135, I think a certain amount of people are going to start seeing that Devin Haney, that it's going to be a lot harder for him to win these fights. Because Devin Haney is not a person, in my opinion, that he just has this non-for-real skill set like a Terrence Crawford or a Canelo Alvarez or even a Lomachenko or a Gervonta Tank Davis. I just don't see that from him. Or an Alexander Usyk or a Fury. I don't think that he's A plus skilled for his divisions. I think that he's decently skilled, but when I take a look at Devin Haney, I don't see someone that, in my opinion, is the next Floyd Mayweather Jr. I see someone who is a wannabe Floyd Mayweather Jr. Pretty much about 35% of what Floyd Mayweather Jr. at his best was. That's what I personally see. But we'll see all in all what happens, because if Devin Haney or George Kambosos, if they end up losing this fight, and let's say they don't get a title shot at 135, and let's say that, they basically have no other option but to move up to 140, facing Montana Love or Teofimo Lopez or, Jose Ramirez, Josh Taylor, Regis Prograis, if all those guys are still there, those are not easy tasks. They just aren't. And all those guys, they have decent power that I just mentioned, and on top of that, decent boxing skills for that division. And they're going to be more similar in stature. Can you really beat those people? We'll see. Devin Haney and George Kambosos, even though I like them as fighters, is it possible that they may end up as the next Nonito Donaire or Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., that once they finally face people that are similar in size? Now do I believe that Kambosos and, Haney are above what a prime Chavez Jr. was? Yes. But my point being is this. I think that once people really come to find that these guys really face fighters that take them seriously 100%, and not only that, but can somewhat compete with their skill set, I think their deficiencies are going to be more exposed. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. All I got for today. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see what happens with these two. It will be a very interesting fight. I do believe more than likely that the Kambosos versus Lomachenko fight probably will happen next, but you never know. But anyways, that's what we got it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.